Okay, we've built the Color Spotter UI. Now let's go ahead and create the logic for a Color Spotter using the Blocks editor. So we click on Blocks, and as you may remember from the review that we did, we need to be able to count how many of the blocks are already tapped. So we're going to go ahead and create a variable. We're going to create a global variable. We're going to call that variable count, and we're going to set that variable to the number 0. So when the app starts, the count variable gets set to 0. Now, as we saw before, every single one of these colored blocks does effectively the same thing. It checks to see whether or not its image is the image with the spot in the middle, and if it is not, it sets its image to the image with the spot in the middle and adds 1 to the count. And if it is the image with the spot in the middle, it sets it back to the solid image and subtracts 1 from the count, and then compares the count to 6 and decides if it is 6 that you win the game. So what we're going to do is we're going to build all that logic for button 1, and then we're going to duplicate it 5 times and adjust it for the other buttons 2 through 5. So we start with button 1, and when button 1 click, so put that on the screen, and then we're going to look at the current state of button 1. So bring back button 1 again. We need an if statement. So what we're going to do is actually go to control, and this is where you can do things like if, looping of for loops, while loops, things like if then else, and so forth. And so we're going to use an if then else. But we need to use the if then else from up here. So we're going to go ahead and drag this in, snap it in there. We're going to tap on this button because we started out with if then, and we actually need an if then else. And so the way you do it is you tap on the little blue square and drag the else inside the if. So now our block says do if then else. We want to actually look at the image in button 1. So we want to come back to the actions for button 1 and get the image for button 1, but we want to make a comparison. So we have to use some logic. So we start out by saying if logic, if something equals something else. So we'll drag this in, click it in there, and for the first argument of our if, we're going to say if button 1 image property, so we're going to drag this over here, snap it in there, is equal to, and now we compare it with a string. We'll snap that in there, and we'll say if it's equal to red.png. So if the button is the solid color square, then we're going to come back to button 1, select the set button image, here we go, drop it in there, and we're going to take this one, and now here's the trick that we use very often with App Inventor. We're going to right click and say duplicate. That means we don't have to go back over here and select from a list. We know the kind of block we want. We're just going to make a copy, snap it in here, and then change the value. So we want it to set it to C red. So that's our first step. Then we need to add 1 to our global count because we've changed it from the solid color to the color with the spot in the middle. So we do that with the variables. We're going to say set, we can just drop this down, global count. We need to get the plus math unit here. So we're going to set global count to get of global count plus a number, snap that in there, and change the number to 1. So now when somebody taps on the first button, we check to see if its image is the solid red color. If it is, we set the image to the solid red color with the dot in the middle, and we add 1 to the count. If it's not the solid color, we want to do the opposite. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate this, drag it in here, duplicate this, drag it in here. We're going to set it to the red color, not the red color with the dot. And we're going to go ahead and delete this because we need to do a subtraction. So now we need a subtraction math block. We're going to duplicate this because we want to just do global count to global count. We'll duplicate this. And now we set global count to global count minus 1. All right, that's all the logic we need. So if we're solid, we can become dotted, and we add 1 to the count. If we're not solid, it means we're dotted, we set it back to solid, and we subtract 1 from the count. And then finally, we're going to do one more if statement to say, if the count's now 6, you win. So back to control, if then, drop it in here. Now we're going to do some logic. We're going to do an equals comparison. Snap that in there. We'll duplicate get global count because we're going to try to compare that. We need a constant of 6. We'll duplicate that one, snap it in here, set it to 6. So now if the global count is 6, what do we want to do? Well, we know what we want to do. We want to make label 5, which is our you win label, show up. Now this is an example of where it'd be nice if our labels were named something more meaningful. So let's go back to the designer, select the you win label, and change the name. Click on the rename button, and we'll change it to win label. Now let's do something similar for the play again button. We'll rename that to play again button. We'll come back to the blocks editor, and now we know what we want to do. If the count is 6, we want to take the win label, and we want to set the win labels visible in order to make that label visible. And so what we need to have is we need a logic item, because we need to have true, because you can't set it to 1 or 0, you have to set it to true or false. All right, so that's going to make our win label, you win, visible. Now we need to make our play again button visible. So we'll go get the play again button command, set play again button visible, and we can duplicate our true and snap it in there. And finally, we need to play our sound. Click our sound, call sound1.play. All right, there we go. We're all set for one of the 6 buttons. So now what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate that 5 times, change the button here, and change the 3 color square names to match the ones that go with that button. So we click on here, right-click, and say duplicate. Now we have another whole thing for button 2. We'll drag it down here so it doesn't overlap button 1. We'll change this to when button 2 click, and then we'll change red to green. We'll change C red to C green, and we'll change red here again to green. And now we need to do that 4 more times for the other 4 buttons. You notice up here, there's a little red triangle with a white exclamation point in it. This means there's a problem someplace, because we have, in this case, 2 different blocks that say what to do when button 3 is clicked, so that when we change this from button 3 to button 4, you'll notice that the errors go away, because now we have a handler for a unique button. We don't have 2 for the same button. All right, this one is yellow. All right, so we're all set with that. Now we can go ahead and try most of the game by simply tapping on the squares and making sure that the colors toggle on and off. Red works. Green didn't work. We must have missed a button someplace. Oh, of course we missed it. We changed the names of the buttons, but we didn't change which button we're actually changing things on. So we need to go back to each one of these, starting with button 2, and change these things that we're setting to say button 2 also. 3 for each button. Button 3, to adjust button 3. What you just saw was something called a bug, and what we're doing is we're debugging. We're fixing our app to do the right thing, because it was doing something different than what we thought it was going to do. All right, let's go ahead and save our project again. Let's come back to the designer. We click on red, and it goes back to red. Green, green, blue, blue, yellow, yellow, orange, orange, purple, purple. All right, so we're ready to do the last bit, which is to add what happens when you win. And we need to be able to add that logic. So let's go back and look at our blocks. And we should be checking to see if it's 6. So we actually should be able to go ahead and win the game now. Let's give it a try. We'll set all 6. There we go. But we haven't yet implemented the block for play again, so the game won't ever stop and start over again. So let's go ahead and add the block for the play again button, and we can get going. So we'll come to play again, and we'll pick when play again, click. And we know we want to do a couple of things. We want to do just this. We want to set the win label visible to false. We want to set the Play Again button visible to false. And we want to set the buttons to the appropriate thing. So we'll set button 1 equal to red. We'll duplicate this again. Let's do the same for each of the buttons. Button 2 to green. Button 5 to orange. And button 6 to purple. And finally, we want to come back to our variable, and we want to set our global count. We'll scroll back down here, back to 0. So we'll drag this 1 out of here, click on this block, delete it, snap the 1 into here, and change the value to 0. So now when we click on the Play Again button, everything disappears and resets, and we can win the game again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You win, and then we click Play Again, and we're back to the start. All right, and that's building the logic for the Color Spotter app. Next up, we're going to get into the challenge. What if you could add to your Color Spotter app running on your device the ability to send a text message to someone saying you won the game? So that's going to be the challenge. We'll talk about it in the challenge video, and then after that, give you time and you can do your own solution, and then you can compare it to my solution.